Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining me today. So, we've seen this massive explosion in the number of APIs that are currently around. And let's take a quick look at why we're seeing this trend. And there's going to be a number of reasons, but let's look at some of them. So the first one, breaking up the monolith. So this is something that has been extraordinarily popular over the past few years, and it's all about taking these big, typically enterprise-sized applications that have got many services associated with them, and thinking about how can we start to break those up into individual standalone services. And there's a number of reasons why you'd like to do this. It enables you to remove dependencies between those services, and that kind of impact means that you can start to support services better individually. It means teams can work on the services separately, so they're not beholden to another service. And it also means that you can manage the life cycle of each of these service-based APIs independent from other ones. Another reason why you're seeing this big explosion of APIs is faster innovation. So, if you have lots of APIs available providing different types of data and services, it means companies can try out proofs of concepts very quickly. They can test out ideas and they can very quickly see if there's some value in going down a certain path. And another purpose is resource sharing. So if you think about a large organization, maybe they've got different departments, those different departments are going to have data and other services. And this idea of being able to wrap those up into APIs means you can easily share them with different groups within your organization and externally to be able to access that data via your APIs. So there's many reasons why we're seeing a huge proliferation of APIs. However, all of these APIs do start to bring some challenges with them. And again, there's a number of challenges that you can have with this, and we'll look at a few of them. So first one is all around discoverability. So you have all of these APIs now. How do developers find them? What does that developer experience look like in discovering what APIs are available, then being able to look at the documentation, understanding how to use them, how do they subscribe to them, and all of that good stuff. The next part is security and performance. So around authentication and authorization. So it's not great if you have to wrap that up with each individual API. You very commonly within an organization, you're probably going to have certain policies depending on who can access them, and that's going to be applied to groups of APIs. So you have the whole authentication and authorization piece. And then you've got the other side of that around performance and protecting your backends of your APIs. So things such as how do you make sure that people aren't hitting the APIs at great rates? So you don't really want to have like 10,000 calls per second to an API that can't handle the backend systems behind it that can't handle it. You've also got an element around performance, so you want to start thinking about caching and all of that good stuff. So how do you start thinking about that when you've got all of these new APIs coming on the scene? And another element as well is governance and monitoring. So how can you make sure that naming conventions are being followed, that you understand which users are using the APIs and should they be using them, and what are the protocols around that? How do you monitor the use of your APIs? So are people, how are they being accessed? Are they being accessed at all? And how do you know, for example, if an API has gone dead, how do you check for that and do some kind of alerting so that you can step in and do something around it? So there's a number of things you can do to support the rise of APIs. So the first one is to start thinking about APIs as a product. So historically, the thinking would be you'd build an application and then you'd go, okay, so how are we going to connect this application to other applications, clients, and so forth? And what we're saying now is actually you flip that, and rather than thinking about the application first, you start treating the API as a product. So in its own right, it's an important product, and then you can start thinking about the applications that come off the back of it. The other one is think of APIs as the first thing, or think about API first, design first, and we're going to touch on that shortly. And another element is think about API management. So how can we remove the complexity around API development so that the only thing we're worrying about is building the API, and then we can let something else manage the security, the governance, the lifecycle management, and so forth. So let's first talk about what is API first. So API first basically says you want to treat your APIs as products. So you treat your APIs as first class citizens. So they are your first consideration, and you treat them as importantly as the application themselves. And you always think that whatever happens, whatever projects you're working with, ultimately everything is going to use your APIs. So that's why you need to start your thinking there. And you want to be thinking about developing your APIs ahead of all of your other components, because that's the component that's most likely to change. That's the one that's going to have feedback. So that's the piece that you want to iterate quickly, get all of the good user feedback in there first. And when you're happy with your API, then everything else can follow in turn. However, API first is not design first. So we're going to have a look at two approaches that are used in API first, so code first and design first. So starting off with code first, what happens here is you first go and get the business input about your APIs. So this would be your business owners, your project managers, your key stakeholders, your developers, and so forth. And you collect up all of the information about your API, what it needs to do, what do the resources look like, what the endpoints, the types, the example data, and so forth. You then take all of that business input and you go away and build your API. And once you've coded your API, you can then generate the API documentation off the back of that. And then that documentation, all the information is taken away and used by your application developers and your QA testers and so forth. Now, design first takes a slightly different approach. So we have that same first step as we had with code first. So this is where we take the business input. So again, we talk to all of our stakeholders and we figure out what our API is supposed to look like. So we do the API design. So this is where we take all the business input and we do the design for our API, and then we build the code off the back of that design. Now, there's a subtle difference here, and we're going to show you through an example walkthrough of a design first API. So we've got that business input, so we're discussing and we're designing the API. And once that's been approved, we can go away and generate the API documentation. We can create some mock data. We can even host up that data. We can host this in a proxied API. So the API hasn't even been built at this stage, but we can host that. We can have information for client SDKs and so forth. And what this means is that all of a sudden, whereas before in code first, what happened was that we waited for the API to be designed and built, then everybody else got involved. Here, what we're saying is because we've got the API specification, because we've got the mock data, because we can even host a code stub, the front end developer can go away and start building their application, calling the API. The back end development can go on building that API in question, and then we just change the path from the proxied API to the back end API, and that's all up and running. Our QA team can go away and start building the tests, their automated tests. So all of a sudden, we've now got 3 sets of development running in parallel, working so much faster. So there's a lot of benefits to using this approach. So it improves communication. We can have this rapid feedback loop from the business and the customers and the developers. So if we need to make any changes to our API spec, we can without investing a huge amount of development work up front. It pushes us into this mindset of product-driven APIs, considering that the API comes first before we worry about other components. It results in a better development experience. So as the developer, you have quick sight of the documentation. You've got something to test against. You can make corrections as necessary. It helps drive that parallel development that we were talking about, and it improves the governance and security. So right from the outset of the API design, we can start thinking about the governance around there. We can think about how things are being accessed. Because we've got the various policy designs and things running in parallel, we can adjust those accordingly. So a super powerful approach. So let's start talking about API management and where does this all start to fit in. So API management is the process of creating and publishing APIs. So think about how do we have APIs. There's no point in having an API if a developer can't find it. So API management helps us not only to create APIs and we can start thinking about the governance behind them, but it helps us publish the APIs in a way that are discoverable to developers to find them, as well as providing documentation and so forth. API management also helps enforce the use of usage policies and controlling access. So we can start to think about things such as, has somebody been authorized or authenticated to use an API? So we can control the access like that. We can also control how the APIs are being used. So do we want to put some kind of rate limiting or throttling? Do we want to filter based on IP address? So we can start to manage that area as well. It also allows us to nurture the subscriber community. So we can manage who is subscribing to our APIs, we can understand how they're using them, we can nurture that community, we can control the messaging, we can get their feedback, and also we can collect and look at usage stats. So we can start to get an understanding of how APIs are being used, whether they're being used, are they being used, as well as being able to look at the health of our APIs. So if something's not working in the back end, we can create alerts to deal with them. So if we think about the anatomy of an API and how, so one approach we might be thinking about is the actual API itself, and then we're thinking about how do we have these sort of hard built-in features around security and how we're monitoring it, and we have this disjointed governance. Effectively, what we're saying with API management is focus on just building the API. What service does it deliver? What service does it deliver? What functionality does it provide? And we're going to let API management deal with the rest. And that means we can just focus on the API management. We can focus on the API, the business logic behind it, and we can let API management deal with the rest. So let's introduce the Gravitee API Management Platform. Gravitee is a fully open source, low code API management platform, which has a highly performant API gateway. It is a Java-based product using the Vertex framework, and it is customizable. So we use plugins to manage the policies. So the policies could be security policies, logging in policies, transformation policies, and so forth. So you have over 50 plugins to manage the various policies you might want to apply in your API flows. And if you don't see the one you want, you can write it. So you can check out the documentation on how to do that. And let's provide a quick overview of the different components within the platform. So if you are an app developer, we have got the developer portal. So this is where your developers of your mobile applications, web applications, and so forth can go, and they can discover what APIs are available. They are able to try out the APIs and try the different endpoints. They can read the documentation there. They're able to subscribe to the APIs depending on what the authorization looks like for those APIs, and they can get reporting information too. Then you've got the API owner, and if you've got some kind of automation as well, if you're, for example, doing CI/CD for your gateways, so your API owner, they may want to be looking at documenting their APIs. They're also going to be managing the APIs, so from the design to the deployment of them, applying the policies. They may want to secure the APIs. They may want to be monitoring the APIs, both how they're being used and also for any potential issues, and look at the analytics. So that can be either be managed manually by the API owner, or you can set up automation via CI/CD, and that's done via the API management console, and that will result in your proxied APIs that come out. And last but not least, you've got the API gateway. So this is where your API proxied APIs would be deployed onto. So if you think about your application that's going to be calling the API, so maybe it's a mobile app, maybe it's your web app. So this is where they're actually going to call the APIs, and the API gateway is going to be managing any of the policies that have been applied on there. And the thing to bear in mind, and what's really powerful with API gateways, is it doesn't have to be a pass through. So if you've got different protocols, so let's say, for example, your API uses a REST protocol, but you need streaming, the API gateway can go and transform that into different protocols depending on what you need. You can also do data transformations too. So if you need to change a header, request header or response header and so forth, that's something you can do as well. So these are all of the different benefits that an API management platform can provide. So let's step into a demo. So this is the Gravitee API Management platform. So I'm on the landing page now. I've run the Docker container on my local machine, so you can repeat this as well. The links will be available. And I'm going to log in now, and the default credentials are admin admin. Of course, if you were going to be deploying this, you would pick something a bit more appropriate. So I'm going to sign in, and this is the landing board. So we don't have any APIs yet, so let's add one. So I'm going to go to the API, press this plus, and we've got a number of options here. We could either create our own API, so we can go in and start creating all of the various API flows and so forth, or we can import one using the import function. So if we've followed our design first principles, we will have some kind of an API definition file. So I'm going to be using this one here. So this is the famous pet store Swagger file. So that's what I'm going to be using. And you can import straight from there from links. So let's do that. I'm going to click import from link. I'm going to paste that address in. It's an open API file, so that's all good. And let's just talk a little bit about some of the options that we're going to select here. So we're going to create documentation. So because we've done all of that work ahead of time in that Swagger file that we're about to import, it means we've got the information about the APIs, what types they are, what methods, and so forth. So we can generate API documentation off the back of that. And that's what we're going to do in this example. The next one, which we're not going to be using, but we'll leave it in for now, is create path mappings for analytics. So if we want to get some idea of how paths are being called and so forth, we select this and then we can have a look at the analytics later. Last but not least, I'm going to select this create policies on paths. So what this will do, this is going to generate a load of flows for us. So each endpoint that we have along with what method it is. And then that's where we can really tailor in what kind of policies we want to apply to our APIs and how we want people to interact with them. So what I'm really interested in is the apply mock policy. And what that's going to do is going to take the example data that exists in the pet store Swagger file, and it's going to use that and generate basically code stubs. So you will be able to go and call the API. And what that means is you'll get some data back. So this is the beautiful thing about design first. It means that all of a sudden our QA engineers can go away and start building tests. Our app developers can go away and start building the apps using the sample data they can call from the API. And obviously the API developer can go and build. And because we can easily change and flex this and iterate accordingly, it means we can fail fast and get that design right rather than going too far down the API development route and then realizing we've missed something. So really great. So all of this stuff, there is not even an API in existence yet, but we're going to have so much that different teams can work with, as we'll show in a second. So I'm going to import this. And there we go, it's all imported. So we need to do a couple of things before we're able to use this and use the documentation and find the information about the API in the developer portal. So the first thing we're going to do is set up a plan. So plans are how Gravitee allows you to manage subscriptions to an API. And you can have multiple plans calling the same API. So this is a really great way, for example, if you've got a free plan and say a paid plan, that you can manage what kind of access somebody has to an API, whether you've got some kind of rate limiting or throttling or any other kinds of bits and pieces you want to have on there. So I'm going to create a free plan, so you don't need to have a key for this. So I'm going to call it free, and it's a free plan. I'm going to click next. And then here I'm going to select the authentication type. So I'm going to select keyless. Just very quickly, you can see you've got some security types, authentication types available out of the box with API Manager. We've also got the open source access manager, and that gives you even more options that you can add. So if you want to log in, say, via Google or Facebook, Twitter, biometrics, all of that's available as well. But I'm going to keep it simple. We're sticking with the keyless plan for now. So I'm just going to click next. And very quickly, if we wanted to add some further things on here whilst we're setting up the plan, we could. So we can do these either on the API flows, or we could do these here if we wanted to just very quickly get these sorted. So I'm going to save all of that, and we've got our plan. So we just need to publish this so that it is going to be available for use so that it can be put in part of our flows. The next thing we're going to do is publish our documentation. So you can add more pages here as well. You can customize your documentation. You don't have to use what's been generated off of the definition file. It's up to you. I'm going to be using what we're going to generate off the back of that pet store swagger file. So you can see it here, and I just need to press that cloud to publish that page. So that's going to be available shortly. And then we've got last couple of bits to tie up. So what we need to do is start this API. And when we start the API, it's going to start it as well as deploying it onto the gateway, syncing everything up that we've done so far. And that's all good and done. And then the last thing we need to do is publish the API. So that's now going to publish the API on the developer portal so that we can go and discover it and read the help files, leave comments and all of that good stuff. So that's all sorted. So before we have a look, let's have a quick peek at our flows. So if I go into the design flows here, what's happened is that this is the result of that import. So you can see that we've got a plan here. So that's what we created, the free plan. So everything will go through the plan that we've created. And if we create more than one, we can set up filters about how they're accessed. But you can see here all of the different flows we have, all of the different methods that are applied to them and so forth. And what you can do is you can fine tune it. So if you wanted to turn some of these off, for example, you can enable and disable those flows. And you can see here all of these different policies that we have that we can click and drag. So anything from transformation, so if we wanted to assign attributes, or we wanted to convert things from JSON to XML and so forth, we have all of those options. And you'll see we've already got a policy in place already, that mock policy, and that was applied at the time of import when we selected that box. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on here. I really do recommend that you go and have a go yourself. It's super easy. You can get this up and running in under 5 minutes. So let's go and have a look at the developer portal. So this is the developer portal. I'm running this again. All of this is on localhost. So all of this is customizable. You can put your own logo, your colors, your text. So all of this can be customized. This is just a default out of the box. So let's go and find our API. So if I go into the catalog and all APIs, you can see our pet store API listed in here. And again, all of this is customizable. We can change all of this. I'm just going with all of the default stuff that we got generated off the back of that Swagger file. So I'm going to view that API. I can add a home page if I want to. I can add images, totally customizable. It's supported with both Markdown, ASCII doc, and a few other bits and pieces. So you can do all of that. And we can jump straight into the documentation. And this is all of the documentation that was generated off the back of that pet store Swagger file. You can find out more information. You can see if we've got example data in there, we can see all of that. So again, super, super quick, super, super easy. We're basically being rewarded for doing that design first step. And then last but not least, and I've just run that, and there you go. You can see we're getting the sample data out of that. Okay, so hopefully you're all really excited about having a go at Gravitee. So let's talk about how you can get involved both with the product and in the community. So if you'd like to try out Gravitee, do go to the downloads page. So you'll be able to get a Docker image from there. If you'd like a helping hand with getting started, do check out dev.gravitee.io/local. There you'll find a blog post that gives you step-by-step guidance on how to get the API management platform up and running on your local machine. We also have a number of videos that give you an end-to-end demo of our product, as well as the open source API management platform too, so do check that out. We also have lots of video guides on the various policies and how to use them. Do check out the repository. So if you find a bug with our product, please let us know. We really appreciate it when the community posts them as issues. And if you're able to help us fix them, please do. So we appreciate PRs. So please do raise one if you're able to do it. Do have a go at making that killer plugin. So if you don't find a plugin that does the job you need, have a go. Again, you can find information in the documentation. And if you love what we're doing, please do give us a star. We really appreciate it. And last but not least, do come and join us in the community forum. So if you've got any questions about using the product, so you're not quite sure how something works or you're getting stuck, do drop us a question. If you see another fellow community member who's asked a question and you know the answer, do feel free to step in. We've got some amazing community members who've put in together their learnings, they've put together tutorials and guides, and if you'd like to get involved, please do. We'd love to hear your stories and your successes. So let us know how you're getting on. If there's something really cool that you're doing with APIM or you've got a story about it, do let us know. And last but not least, we would love to hear your suggestions and feedback, both on our community and on what we can do better in the product. So do let us know. And if you've got any questions, come find me in the community or you can drop me a message on Twitter. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of conference.